The flight had started like any other, a budget airline filled with tired faces, crying children, and people counting minutes until landing. The man sat near the back, his shoulders slumped, clothes worn thin from years of careful use. He was a single dad named Daniel, though no one around him knew that, and he didn't look like a hero. He looked like someone life had been heavy on. His hands were rough, scarred from long hours of manual labor, and his eyes carried the permanent exhaustion of a parent who slept lightly, always listening for a child who might need him. This flight was not for business or vacation, it was a last attempt at stability, a job opportunity in another city that promised just enough money to keep the lights on and food on the table for his young daughter waiting back home. Daniel had almost not boarded the plane. The ticket had cost him nearly everything he had saved, and he had spent the night before departure sitting on the edge of his daughter's bed, watching her sleep, wondering if the risk was worth it. His life had already taught him that hope could be dangerous. After his wife passed away suddenly years earlier, illness stealing her in a matter of months, Daniel's world had collapsed quietly. There was no dramatic breakdown, just a slow, grinding struggle to survive. He worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, took buses before sunrise, came home after dark, and learned how to braid hair, cook cheap meals, and hide his fear behind a tired smile. Every decision he made was for his child, even this flight. The woman he would save sat several rows ahead, unaware of him, wrapped in her own private storm. She was well dressed, elegant even in economy class, her posture controlled, her expression distant. Her life, from the outside, looked polished and successful, but inside she was unraveling. She was running from something too, not poverty, but pressure, betrayal, and a public collapse that had followed her everywhere. She had boarded the plane with a heart already racing, anxiety curling tight in her chest long before the turbulence began. When the plane suddenly dropped, when the lights flickered and the screams erupted, something inside her broke. Her breathing became shallow and erratic, her vision narrowing, her body locking into a terror she could not control. Panic attacks were not new to her, but this one was different, amplified by altitude and fear. She clutched the armrest, her chest burning, the world spinning, her body shutting down as if convinced this was the end. Flight attendants rushed down the aisle, trying to calm people, but fear is loud and fast, and help doesn't always arrive in time. Daniel saw her struggling from his seat. He didn't know her story. He didn't know her name. He only saw a human being drowning in terror, and something instinctive pulled him forward. Maybe it was the memory of watching his wife gasp for breath in a hospital room. Maybe it was years of putting someone else before himself. Or maybe it was simply who he was. He unbuckled and moved against the flow of panic, ignoring the shaking plane and the shouted instructions. He knelt beside her seat, steadying himself, placing his presence between her and the fear swallowing her whole. He didn't perform miracles. He didn't have training or titles. He did what parents do when a child is scared. He focused on grounding her, slowing her breathing, using calm gestures and unwavering attention until the storm inside her eased just enough for her to breathe again. Minutes felt like hours. The turbulence eventually softened, the plane stabilized, and the screaming faded into shaken silence. Oxygen masks were returned, tears wiped away, hearts slowly calmed. The woman leaned back, exhausted but alive, her breathing steadier now. Eyes glassy with relief, she looked up, searching for the man who had held her steady through the worst moment of her life. But Daniel was already gone. He had quietly returned to his seat as soon as she stabilized, not waiting for thanks, not seeking recognition. He didn't even glance back. For him, it wasn't heroism. It was just something that needed to be done. He spent the rest of the flight staring out the window, hands clasped, thinking about his daughter and the fragile line between disaster and survival. When the plane landed, passengers buzzed with stories, replaying the terror, praising the crew, speculating about what could have gone wrong. The woman stood slowly, scanning faces, determined to find him. She felt a strange urgency, a pull she couldn't explain. Someone had seen her at her weakest moment and stayed. She needed to know who he was. But Daniel blended into the crowd. He moved quickly through the terminal, catching a bus straight from the airport, heading toward a small rented room he had arranged in advance. He had no one waiting to greet him, no safety net, no certainty that the job interview scheduled for the next morning would even happen. He unpacked quietly, folded his one good shirt, and fell asleep on a narrow bed with his phone clutched in his hand, just in case his daughter called. Days passed. The woman could not forget him. She asked airline staff, filled out reports, searched social media, but there was no name, no record, no clear description beyond a man in the back who helped. It unsettled her. She was used to knowing things, controlling outcomes, leveraging influence. This was different. This was a debt she could not repay. Her life, which had already been cracking before the flight, began to shift. She thought often about the calm in his eyes, the way he had focused entirely on her without expectation. It forced her to confront how disconnected her own world had become, how surrounded she was by people yet how alone she had felt in that seat. Meanwhile, Daniel's reality remained harsh. The job interview did not go well. The position was filled internally, and the polite rejection left him staring at a future that looked painfully familiar. He picked up temporary work, long shifts for low pay, sending most of it back home. He called his daughter every night, pretending everything was fine, laughing when she told him about school, swallowing the lump in his throat when she asked when he would come back. Weeks later, fate moved quietly. The woman, unwilling to let the story end unanswered, continued her search through less obvious channels. A small mention in an internal airline report, a vague description, a bus route near the airport, a temporary employment record. It wasn't fast or dramatic, but persistence has its own power. When she finally found him, it wasn't in an office or on a stage. It was at a construction site, Daniel eating lunch alone, boots dusty, hands wrapped around a cheap sandwich. She watched him for a moment before approaching, struck by how ordinary he looked, how invisible kindness often is. He was startled to see her, confused at first, then uncomfortable with the attention. Gratitude poured out of her, emotional and sincere, but he struggled to accept it. He hadn't saved her for recognition. He had done it because someone needed help. What followed wasn't charity. It wasn't a dramatic rescue. It was opportunity. She listened to his story, truly listened, and in doing so, saw the strength it took to keep going without applause. She used her influence carefully, not to hand him a miracle, but to open a door he could walk through himself. A stable job with benefits. Help relocating his daughter. A chance at something that felt like breathing room for the first time in years. Daniel didn't cry when his life changed. He didn't celebrate loudly. He just stood still one night in a small apartment, watching his daughter sleep in her own bed again, and allowed himself a quiet, shaky breath of relief.